I mean, architecture can shape behavior. That's the sort of power of architecture, right? And sometimes you also want it to do in a certain way, but in the process, where there are so many stakeholders, you chose to do it in a different way. But where is the soft layer? Where do we come and celebrate our festivals? There's a lot of debate happening from design point of view now. I think we should definitely, we are beginning to look at the buildings now, is repurposing.
Basically, we need to empathize with the architects.
Absolutely.
We need to know that there's a lot going on behind them. Hello and welcome to Real Advice on Real Estate, a flagship podcast by Birla Estates. My name is Nikil Taneja, and this is where we will get real about the ups, downs, what's, whys, and trends about real estate. We are so excited to have with us today Ankit Kamboj. Ankit is the Global Board Director at Broadway Mallion and leads the Mumbai studio, where he's been involved in a wide range of award-winning landmark projects across the workplace, residential, and retail sectors. With experience in Singapore, London, and India, Ankit's architectural approach emphasizes a deep connection between urban spaces and the built environment. His commitment to sustainability and wellness shines through in projects like a naturally ventilated house designed around courtyards for a private client in India. Ankit continues to push the boundaries of architecture with his innovative and thoughtful designs. Thank you so much for being here, Ankit. Ankit, we are so excited to have you, and how are you feeling?
Great, Nikil. Pleasure to be here.
Yes?
Yeah.
I love what you do with design. I'm going to deep dive into that. But before we actually get into that section, we have something fun that we do with all guests.
Yeah.
It's called The First Thing. I'm going to ask a few questions about your firsts that will hopefully get us to know you a little bit better as a person before we get into your expertise and your domain understanding. So let me ask you the first question of those. What's your first memory of the home you grew up in?
Yeah, interesting. I think home for me has always been about comfort. And when we were growing up, I think more rather than actually being inside the house, it was always about outside the house. You're meeting your friends, being in a neighborhood, playing cricket, just being outside, but come home, right? Come home to your family, and kitchen was always used to be our favorite place. Just the idea of eating together as a family, as a comfort food. And that always remains with me, like forever. Yeah.
Which part of the country was this?
So I was born in a place near Dehradun. So that time density was not that much. It used to be obviously low-rise, G+1 or ground floor architecture, right?
Yeah.
And we always sort of loved the neighborhood we were in. The home was always also about your neighbors. Because you spend a lot of time in your neighbor home rather than actually your home. And you make friends, and those friends, obviously, you go to school with, you know them, you play cricket with. So yeah, it's just the, not just the home itself, but also the spaces around your home and the neighborhood itself.
You know, I've heard that a lot on this podcast, the outside spaces, which is something that I don't think many people would be saying today when they're growing up. But you constantly hear from folks who have grown up in an earlier time that home is actually resonant not just with inner spaces but outside ones.
Absolutely, yeah.
What is the first realization to you of why homes are so important?
I think it's just the idea of, and I think especially in our culture, we do need that sort of sense of security and privacy. So home, like I said, home was always about coming home to your family. It's different way. Obviously, you grow up, you have attachment to your personal room. You grown up in that room, right? You share the room with your brother or sister. You also always look forward to that, having them out of the house and then having your own sort of personal space.
Hard relate.
And then just being together in the home, listening to your family, eating together. I think these are the things that I miss, and that always remain in my memory more than sort of the shape of the house or how many rooms, etc., right? It's just being that place of comfort. Like
love that. Yeah. The warmth of a home is what you always remember. I'd love to know though, what is the first home that you saw design-wise that you fell in love with?
Many. It changes because we are in design profession, right? When we were studying, we always used to talk about falling water, and I think that's because of the education system. because we always were taught like in a way that the famous architects from the world. I personally love Kerala homes, Chettinad architecture. I think just the idea of being inside the home with the courtyard, respecting obviously sun, respecting climate, respecting the monsoons. That you actually get water in, almost like inside the courtyard. Also, I mean, we have different culture in this country, right? Different climate conditions, also different regions. So our architecture here is obviously not just like copy paste, it's very regional. That's why I love the Chettinad architecture, the Kerala homes. Even those sort of big your verandas, and also in a way it was always about sort of creating the link. Right, the verandas are always about you have conversation with your neighbor, and the first step you take inside the house.
Love that. Such thoughtful answers. Absolutely love them. I haven't been to too many homes in that region, but I think I have a sense of what you're talking about, and I know it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
What's the first home that you bought and why?
Interesting. I think first home, there are two sides to it. One side is obviously being a designer, and second side was obviously growing wealth, right? The home I bought was not necessarily that time that I wanted to live in it, but I was looking for opportunity to buy in Bangalore city. Okay. So I bought the home, didn't get to stay in the home at all because when it got finished, I just sold it. I just didn't love the home, and that sort of again goes back to the idea of lifestyle, like why you buy a home, etc. But also that time I personally bought the house just to put in the money, get a house, and just grow some wealth, and eventually I sold it. That was my first home.
So let me ask you about the first home that you bought and lived in.
We're still looking to buy, me and my wife, still looking to buy a new home. And I think for us, I mean, we do have our parents' home, right? It's just the home which we want to buy for ourselves is something which will suit our lifestyle. And we're still searching for that home, like, oh, this is what we want this home to be. So one day, for sure.
Well, if you have any doubts of what kind of home to buy and how do you go about this process, our podcast will help you. We have a lot of episodes on the same.
Definitely.
Let me also ask you, when did you first feel that designing homes or architecture can be a profession for you?
I think I don't have that sort of typical answer that one day I figured out this is what I want to do. I think it has been a journey. Journey from leaving the place where we were growing, stepping out, found an opportunity to go into an architecture school, and then just trying to figure out there, right? And eventually fall in love with it. And architecture is a process because it's not just every site is different. Every city is different. Every design you do should be different. And that's why every day you fall in love with something, right? And it's just very much alive. There are days which are very, very tough that oh my God, why can't we do it this way? But most of the days you just love what we do. So, I mean, I'm still searching for the answer. Like I'm in love with my profession. I'm in love with sort of what we do. But there's not a single time I can say, hey, this is where I wanted to be an architect. I think it's just the whole journey.
Let me put it this way. Is there a first time that you felt proud of doing what you do?
Yes. I mean, now, especially when we have designed so many places, so you can really get the direct feedback from the people who live inside those, especially home. So one of the home we designed, and the conversation was from day one, hey, and the idea was, can you design a home about togetherness, right? And the idea is that how can you bring my family together? Especially in our culture where multi-generation families live together.
Correct.
So home should not be a barrier. Home should actually create this sort of environment where people actually can come together and yet have your sort of private spaces. The home is built, they're living there, and every day I get the sort of positive feedback, right? That's like, wow. And this is the sort of where they don't know, right, what they want beyond a brief. Like, hey, we want this kind of five bedroom, 6 bedroom, and we sort of come in pictures, hey, I think you need this vision. We're almost sort of creating the vision together for the family. and I think the best feedback and proud moment is when they say, hey, we love. I think it just changed the behavior, the way they used to live in their home.
And where is this home?
So this is in Nasik.
Okay.
Beautiful weather. The house is like fully, almost designed to be naturally ventilated. So they never switch on ACs.
Wow.
And yet it's very ambitious. It has your double-eyed sort of lounge, like it suits their lifestyle. But at the same time, it does respect the climate. For example, when the grandmother, she wake up in the morning, she always go and see the east sun, how the sun is growing. We designed multiple courtyards, so they almost can follow the sun during the day. And you spend your evenings with sunset. So yeah, it's just that, like I always say, let's follow the light and air and you'll have a nice house. Yeah.
This reminds me almost of this term called love language.
Yeah.
I feel like your love language is homes, right? And I think that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Designing homes being a love language, to be able to talk about homes in this way. I think that's a gift. So very excited for the rest of the conversation. But even before we start that, Ankit, I'm asking this question to every single person who's on this show. We obviously understand that what you do is complex and nuanced.
Yeah.
But if you had to explain what you do to a 12-year-old child, how would you explain your work?
Yeah. So there are many definitions. One of the simplest one is that we create spaces. Okay. We design buildings. And the 12-year-old, how they live, we shape those buildings, right? And now the way we are approaching our architecture is almost the art in architecture is about soft storytelling. So the 12-year-old, I hope when this generation grows up now, they also talk about the city and the neighborhood.
Okay.
And not just like the house they live in. Is as important as the house they actually buy. And I think this is where we sort of shapes all those. And I mean, architecture can shape behavior. That's the sort of power of architecture, right? If you live in a house with good sunlight, good air ventilation, you always feel happy.
Correct.
If you live in a house where there's no sunlight or too much sunlight because there's a heat, you always don't want to be in the house, right? So yeah, it can shape behavior. So that's what we do as architects, or that's what we should rather do. Like if we're not doing it, because it's a very important profession.
So you don't just create homes, but you tell the stories of homes.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about architecture.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you about architecture. It's a fascinating career to pursue, especially in a country like India that's known for its historical monuments. There's also a burden of legacy when you have such a rich tradition, such a rich and varied tradition from across the country. Let's start with talking about how does architecture work in a modern world, but with a cultural identity that is historic. So how does this perspective influence in the way that you How does this perspective influence the design of different types of spaces, like homes versus workspaces?
Yeah. So, India has a very, very strong cultural identity, right? And India obviously is very regional responses as well. So how we design Mumbai is not necessarily how we should design Bangalore, for example. The weathers are different. And India, people obviously know these monuments, obviously how it has been promoted, but if you dive deep into the regional architecture, they're just beautiful.
Yeah.
Like for example, we talked about Kerala homes, why they work in that environment. If you go to Himachal, the homes are different from what you find in Kerala. If you go deep into Uttarakhand, the homes are always elevated, so they can get even their animals as part of the home as well. So different regions had different environment. Also, we have had very strong aesthetics, like especially if you look at the decor, even the artisans we have, right? It's just beautiful culture in this country. That's one part of it. Second part is social infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Which is, for example, we get fascinated by looking at the buildings, but we also should talk about social infrastructure. How do we celebrate spaces in the city? Just to give you an example, we have so many festivals, like for example, Ganesha festival.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about infrastructure, for example, we're talking about roads, talking about metro, but where is the soft layer? Where do we come and celebrate our festivals? What are those spaces like in the city where we call, like for example, do we pick any city in the world? You always talk about great parks, right? You have Central Park in New York, you have Hyde Park, you have obviously, and even the new city like we were chatting about Singapore, always about this public spaces, right? Not just the building. So we need those social infrastructure in the city, which is very, very critical where we come and sort of appreciate the space. So the work we're doing, when we're doing, looking at a sort of limited site, say some residential, we're always talking about how do we give back to the city. So are we creating those link to the city, for example, at ground level? And in a very simplest way, you can live in a gated community, but you never feel like going down because there's no link to the city. Have a shop, have that your neighborhood bar, your neighborhood coffee shop, right? Are we sort of linking that to the city? So and that the ground floor becomes such an important layer where people come together, right? People needs to come together. How do you engage with your neighborhood? How do you engage with your city? Do we have spaces to celebrate? For example, if you're building a residential community, our residential communities are very, very different from rest of the world because nobody has the kind of festival we have. So when we do have festival, are there enough spaces to celebrate those festivals in your residential community? And in obviously in all city or historical or like traditional neighborhoods, you will have those spaces, right? They probably still find a way to. Obviously, densities were also different, but when we're building new now, do we respect that? And I think this is a very deeper question: how do we preserve the culture, right? And while we obviously need to look at density, and we building especially city like Mumbai, we're building mega density, but how do we still preserve the culture? I think that's something we're definitely looking at, and that would distinct us from everywhere else.
So give me an example of something that you said. You said giving back to the city.
Yeah.
What does that look like when you're actually designing it? Do you have an example of something you've done to make that happen?
Yes. So let me give you an example, right? Say you have a river, right? Your site is next to it. You can choose to build a wall and build some towers within it, or you can choose a different way. Hey, I think there will be a lot of people walking to the river, and they will probably be walking next to our site, right?
Correct.
So, and when they were walking next to your site, then do you make a conscious decision to give some sort of plaza before they actually go to the river? In that plaza, can you create some retail? Can you create an opportunity for someone to pause before they actually walk to the river?
Wow.
Right? And can you create an opportunity for people to even come and engage with their space next to the river? And that would make it a destination, right? So, very simple example. And imagine there was a boundary wall and you're yet walking to the river. So, and you can choose to do that, but then you just lose the connection with the city. Absolutely no connection with the city. And if we took a decision, no, let's give back something to the city. Let's create some sort of that pause space, which means you obviously add value to the city. You're also creating retail. You're also creating some sort of F&B. You're creating destination, but just giving back to the city. Creating the space in a city at your level, which can actually just improve the city itself. And I think that's what we are doing, and I think everybody should, because nobody likes walking next to the boundary wall. We are humans, like we are social animals. We like to see people.
Yeah.
When we're walking in a city, you want to see a shop. You want to see, hey, something new at the shop. You just like to see the smell of coffee, and suddenly you want to go inside and drink the coffee, right? And this is what we need to have in our cities and preserve that. And obviously, a city like Bombay, Mumbai, go to the old part of the city, you still have it. You can still we will have our own favorite cafes, right? And most of the times you walk there, hey, let's go there, just spend like 20 minutes in this cafe.
In fact, what they've done recently, they've changed the norms around Kala Ghoda as an example, where now it's become walkable. So you can't have vehicles entering there. And it's been done, as you said, I think to preserve the identity and to create these walkable spaces where you feel the sense of community, which otherwise, when there's always cars on the street, you may not actually feel.
Yeah. And once in a place like Kala Ghoda, if people find reason to go there beyond just looking at those buildings. For example, if we activate them with some sort of use, get galleries, museums, retail, F&B, and suddenly you want to spend a day.
Yeah.
And this is what cities are about. Like we go out to spend a day in the neighborhood, right? I think our cities are now getting there, which I'm excited about.
Wow. So how does this differ when you're looking at, you've spoken a lot about home spaces, but how does this differ when you're looking at workspaces?
Yeah.
When you're designing for work in India, do you still think about the heritage of India, or is this all about modernization and rethinking work?
Yeah, so the workspaces and the kind of workspaces we're doing, obviously you have, India is fortunate to have a lot of tech in this country.
Correct.
And a lot of workspaces you're designing for ultimate sort of tenant, right? Who are actually coming to occupy these spaces, and also have this workforce, talented workforce, which we have in our country. So they have their own strategy. So they have, for example, strategy how they want to retain their own talent, what they should provide within those workspaces. For example, some companies would have massive food offer. So workspace is not a workspace, just suddenly become different, right? So it's not a desk, it's actually about wellness in the workplace. So anybody, and it has happened more post-COVID as well, which is like, why do I want to spend 8 hours in a workspace or more than that,
true,
right?
yeah.
What are those sort of, and you can't be on a desk for 8 hours. So do have opportunity to work in different spaces, do have opportunity to walk out of the building, but yet in the building, but have some sort of garden workspaces. So when we talk about workspaces, we're actually looking at a different layer, like how do we get wellness in a workspace? And some of the identities coming back from that, for example, we are getting a lot of gardens with the building.
Okay.
So people have choice to step out. Like nobody wants to be in the air conditioning spaces all the time. So do you have opportunity to step out? And you can choose to even work. So we're actually calling them garden workspaces. So you don't necessarily just need to have spaces where people just going out for a cigarette, but actually they can work there. Second thing we're doing is obviously...
Can you give me an example of a space like this?
So we have designed a building in Bangalore, very famous building. It would be occupied by Google. And it's already up and is also matching their identity, but also the city. So city in a sense, obviously the workspaces are secured and you can't have, like, for example...
privacy concerns, of course.
Yeah, I mean, you also... There are a lot of tech happening inside,
Correct.
so you can't even open everything because there's a lot of dust and everything coming in. So mostly are sealed spaces. But after that, you also have opportunity to step out. So we actually created these gardens.
Beautiful.
And with each garden, we have the real trees, so they'll grow and they have sense of being just in and out. So not necessarily just being inside the box. Ground floor, again, is very important in workplace. Like how do you get a community? But also, a workplace will typically have a lot of people coming in morning and a lot of people going out in the evening, right? So when they come in the morning, how do you engage with the ground floor? So in that case, we have almost like 3-story town hall spaces.
Wow.
You have staircases. You have a lot of engagement with the community. How a tenant will also engage with their employee, right? Just to keep them really excited. We also need to retain that staff in the building. But also, most importantly, is how do you reduce the heat in the building, because it's mostly occupied. So how do you take less and do more? So you actually are very much looking at long-term sustainability.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to talk about sustainability a bit, but before that, there is a conversation now internationally that a lot of the urban spaces now are looking very similar to each other.
Yes.
Everything has become homogenized.
Yes.
We don't seem to have, cities are not able to retain the thing that made them so unique in the first place. So especially with the rise of tech culture and IT cultures, there's a lot of buildings that absolutely look like each other. How can India make sure that we are as rapidly moving towards urbanization as other international cities, at the same time not losing a sense of its identity? Again, if you have some examples of what India can do and has been doing, would be very helpful.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's something we think about almost on a daily basis. Because India does have strong cultural identity. India also have different weather, right? So if you design in a space where too much heat and you have a glass building, suddenly you don't want to live inside the glass building, right? And I think a lot of answer will actually come from all this, looking at sustainability, that why we should not just do all the glass buildings in cities, why we should also rethink it in terms of materials, local materials, how many windows do you need in a building, right? Because one of the reasons to actually have glass and people picked up as a sort of way to build is actually fast construction, right? I think eventually when you look at the impact in long term, people would now perhaps the conversation about how do we not do that, right? How do we reduce the heat load on the building? One way to do it that obviously have that sort of skin and whether the skin can take up the identity itself, which is sort of derived from our local motifs, local like even looking at the artisans and the art we have, where that would give us a strong identity. But definitely, I think it's a very important question that why everything is looking same.
So I want to know, because you mentioned, there are so many different factors like weather. So there is obviously natural light, sometimes ventilation, the region that the city, the region that the home is located in or the workplace is located in. All of them add to what ultimately it becomes. Right?
Yes.
Now, is there an opportunity over here of fusing those, as you said, I think the traditional Indian aesthetics, but with innovation and design? And again, I'd love for you to give me an example of something you've done in this space that actually manages to use, like you gave an example of, I don't know if it was a real example of a place by the river, but any place that you've actually created that has managed to do this really well.
So we are creating one right now in development with the Birlas.
Okay.
And what we also realized that one, you need many stakeholders to come together.
Correct.
And we actually have worked with very strong cultural architect. And what they did, they actually went to the city, studied the spaces, studied every art, studied every motif in the city, and from the more meaningful point of view, right? Not just like hey, this is how it looks like, just put it here. But like what it does, why it was used that time, what it does for identity, why they had certain proportions. So we did that. Now we're actually applying that knowledge. The project has not been launched yet. It will get launched. And it's already looking great because it looks local, right? And yet for the future, and it's not just like repeating you can't copy paste like what happened in the past and make it look like that, right? Because scales are different, proportions are different. You might be borrowing something from a G+1 or the different scale, but how do you apply it here, like in a more meaningful way? So that is happening, okay? And we are sure there will be one of its kind project because it's local, yet for the future, yet modern, but it has a very strong identity, and we believe that. Let me give you an example. You can have a nice F&B and restaurant to go to.
Yeah.
When you go close and you see the details, this is where people can begin to relate to it. Hey, it looks like that, right? And those details are actually coming from what people are used to seeing in daily life. For example, the sort of patterns we have in our saris, right?
Wow.
The pattern we have in, for example, why do we do that rangoli in a certain way, right? Why do we actually create art in a certain way? And those patterns are very much part of our life. We relate to those patterns, right? So if you're doing interpretation in a different way and you want to use that aesthetic as part of some detail, people actually relate to it. And that detail actually can come at a different scale. It doesn't need to be, like we're not suggesting you copy the same detail and put it in a very big building, right? Because that's not something we should do. But it's a detail, for example, detail of a door, detail of a probably a railing or even a doorknob, right? Because architecture happens at different scale. But let me go back to the point I said. The most important thing is the space. For example, we don't want to do just build a building and then put some sort of aesthetic on it. There's a larger way why the spaces are working in a certain way and they allow for those aesthetics to come in, right? For example, in the Bangalore, the project which I was talking about, we have created that space next to the river which means we pushed back the building, but also then created almost like G+1 restaurant spaces.
Wow.
Now suddenly the human scale is very different, right, compared to looking at 40-story tower. And once we started to look at those aesthetics, they could actually get very deeper into details of localness, right? Like how do we bring that aesthetic as part of this building? So suddenly the scale is different. I hope I could answer your question.
No, I think
Yeah.
I'm always imagining what this place is looking like,
Yeah.
and I want to go there now.
Yeah, it would be amazing.
Changing. So, I'm curious to know from you, what do you think is something that internationally, architecturally, people are doing right that we can use and adopt in India better, and what is it that India is doing really well that we can teach international architects?
Yeah, I think the definition of landmark developments are changing. For example, we used to get very excited about looking at a building and they're sort of, oh, this is taller and this is all right.
The sense of awe.
Sense of awe. But I think there has been a lot of focus now internationally about creating places. Just to give example, when you think of Singapore, you don't think of Singapore anymore just about building, but also the overall green city. So the green is happening at every level. And this is also happening with social infrastructure at ground, also within the building. So every building is now allowing that social infrastructure to be part of the building itself, right? For example, you can go to a tall tower, you can grab a coffee on ground floor, but you also can go to the roof as a free access, sort of public access, right? Suddenly you're engaging with the building. Now, how the building looks is becoming less sort of relevant, but most importantly, what the building does is becoming more relevant. And I think this is where now even cities like Dubai change. I mean, Dubai, for example, they created obviously the Burj, Al Burj, right? And that sort of became an attraction as a building. But they also now spending a lot of effort to creating the place around the Al Burj, right?
The Burj, yeah.
And they're just saying that you can create a tall tower, but you need space to appreciate it, and that is public space around it. So if you go to obviously go to Dubai, I'm not saying Dubai is a great example, but at least now you have that sort of F&B, you have that the bay, the water, the fountain, the engaging the city, right? They appreciate it, right?
Absolutely.
So that's why I always think the city has its own strong identity, which not necessarily will come from the building, but actually come from the places itself, like the neighborhoods. Like what does it do? What does the sort of new buildings do for the city? I think that's something. There's a lot of effort in Singapore, which is happening on pedestrianization. So they're creating these links where people can actually walk free. The cycling, for example, Singapore 10 years ago, before that, it used to be about obviously hot climate and hot and humid and obviously rain. But now a lot of people are cycling because they actually created the infrastructure to cycle.
Yeah.
So even our colleagues, I know that they just come on a bike. I was like, my God, this is a different thing. And obviously, if you happen to have a shower in your office, you just go and take a shower and you're ready, right? So people are willing to do that, especially if you have infrastructure. So that's really fascinating. Something we need in our city. I think the dialogue, the focus obviously right now is we're catching up, right? We're catching up with the metros. I mean, we're late, but we're catching up. Obviously, not necessarily very fascinated by big roads, but still they're building infrastructure. But if you have a lot of metros in a city, you don't probably need big roads because people actually can travel in metro. And I think I started with this, that you need social infrastructure as much as you need this sort of infrastructure which is transport. So we do need those parks and we do need those places to go to. Kalakoda is example, for example, if we can activate it, that would be a best example of how we actually activating our spaces. And not looking at like Dubai or Shanghai as an example. I think the answer will come from our own cities. And I'm really excited about that.
No, absolutely. Like I was in Denmark recently, and what you say, they're all walkable cycling cities. It's beautiful to see. Everybody has a cycle, and I saw families in like a three-tire cycle almost. Where the man or the woman is driving, and there are kids sitting at the back, which is just absolutely so interesting.
And if you look at us, we are always I don't know now, but if you see people in our cities, they always used to walk.
Yeah.
The people still walk.
Yeah.
Okay, what we don't have is infrastructure for them to walk properly. And I think that's an answer we need actually from our cities.
But what are we teaching the world? Anything that you can...
I think definitely cultural responses. There are a lot of practices and a lot of architecture happening now in India, which is exciting. I think we should be proud of it. A lot of voices are coming from a lot of new practices, which are, I think, some of the answers, like you asked me about cultural identity, etc. I think is happening in our country. I think, and also with the help of, like, obviously you have a lot of exposure now with your magazines, and so it's actually happening. It's going to the world. A lot of architects are winning awards here at global platforms, which is exciting to see. Like fellow architects doing fantastic work. There's still a lot of bad stuff, but I think I'm mostly excited about the good stuff which is happening. The climate response, I think if we can do it right, especially in how we respond to each city, I think it's definitely the world can learn. And especially obviously the new cities in the world, because I think that it will happen. I'm excited about this.
You mentioned climate and green a bunch of times, and I think that is one of the most important aspects of building anything today, right?
Yeah.
You have to ensure it's not harming the ecology around it. So I want to know from you, how can design be integrated with microclimate and biodiversity?
Yeah.
How do you ensure that you enhance the local ecosystem and at the same time harmonize what you're doing with nature?
Yeah. So sensitive architecture, and let's take it in different scale, right? Let's go back to the neighborhood again. In which neighborhood you're building, and sustainability also has many different layers. I think I also believe your biodiversity is part of sustainability layer. That we need to protect our trees. We need to enhance biodiversity. We need to have more green in the city. We need to have those birds in the city, right? Because humans always we always love to be part of nature, right? So especially if you're building in a city, like how much you can reduce the urban heat impact, especially if a city like Bombay. Like you don't build something which is creating which is not too exposed. It should be shaded. So for example, some of the projects we're looking at is dividing that community level and the building level itself. So community level, I think our spaces, especially when we're creating these gardens, etc., it should be shaded. If it's not shaded, you're exposed to the sunlight, right?
Yeah.
There's too much heat. You're getting this heat island effect in the city. So how can we not do that and make sure your development actually well shaded, especially when it's community? Obviously, you want to have some sun, but when do you want to get the sun is also an art. At building level, obviously orientations of the building is critical.
Yeah.
How do you reduce the heat exposure, right? If you have an orientation which is west, you're going to have too much heat coming in your building, and obviously, and then in a very simple way, you're going to take a lot of air conditioning to cool it down, right? So actually, it's bad. But again, the answer is in our traditional architecture, how we used to have deep overhangs, verandas, so you can do whatever orientation, but that is filtered sunlight, right?
Yeah.
There always was a barrier. The protection was very important in our architecture. I think that's critical for sustainability. How do you protect our building from harsh sunlight? Natural ventilation. For example, look at a city like Bangalore. I mean, we never needed an air conditioner in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now people actually need it because the way things are getting built. The Bangalore was always a city. If you sit in a room, you open two windows and you happen to have cross ventilation, you always feel good, right? The weather is fantastic.
Yeah.
How do we get more cross ventilation? Especially this question is more and more for when you're building high rise, right? You're building tall and tall. You want to have structural integrity because you're building tall, but still how do you make it breathable? Like can the building breathe? Like can still allow for the cross ventilation at your core, at your house level? Very, very critical. Technology, obviously now, how do you reduce the heat gain inside the building? Obviously that also goes with your amount of windows you have in a building, right? Especially when it comes to your unit. But if you need the window and also maximize the sunlight, we also need technology to work. Like glass are getting smarter now. So how do we use those glass as well? So that's definitely at a microclimate level, simply, right? There are a lot of, like, it's very technical.
Yeah.
There are a lot of analysis happens, how the buildings are placed, how much heat gain you're going to have. So how do you reduce that? What do you do to reduce the heat gain, right? And that is part of what we do and engage with the consultants who are actually expert in this, working with us.
But can you also give a couple of examples of innovation in green building, as they call it?
Yeah.
What are we doing right in terms of sustainability, and what is the long-term impact of that on the real estate market?
I think the one is people are getting aware. I think people, especially, it was almost like a myth, or maybe partially true, that if you were to make your building sustainable or green, it will cost you more. But that myth is going away because the buyers are actually getting smart, and also they want to live in a place which is sustainable, and they also want to live in a place which is green and having less impact, right? And every answer will have to come from community when they start sort of demanding that, right? So just striving for simplicity, right? And a lot of answer again is in our traditional architecture. And like I said, people know that coast ventilation is important, but not many people do it, right? People know that orientation of the buildings are important, and if you can't do that, then shading is very important, but not many people do it, right? So we have to start doing that more. And I think there are a lot of good developers now thinking about this in a more sensible way. And also because there's a long-term impact on the building, especially once you start to live in the building, you have to pay a lot of money to just cool down your home. You're paying a lot of electricity bill. So there's a lot of cost, right? You pay to live in that building, which is not sustainable. So definitely happening innovation at that level, that people actually just probably striving for simplicity again, okay? It might not be innovative, but going back sometimes is actually innovative.
Yeah,
right?
perhaps, absolutely.
Like think simple. That is being innovative as well, right? Because sometimes people think innovative means just put one more layer of trees on the building and it would become green. It won't, right? It's also how you do it. And then obviously innovation when it comes to tech, which is coming from industry, can help you. Like I said, I think, but we can't rely on that absolutely. For example, there are glass in the market now which are powered, okay? But unfortunately, you have to give them power to reduce the heat gain within the building. So in the long term, they are sustainable, but that can't be the only solution, right? I think that could be part of the solution to reduce the heat gain in the building, but can't be the only solution. So in the technology and designers have to work together to create these sustainable spaces.
But speaking of technology, there's also smart materials right now, right?
Yeah.
And how do you think that, with all the changes and evolution in AI technology, as well as things like smart materials, how can this change the design and construction process?
Yes. So we have been constructing now for ages with concrete, okay? The concrete itself is not sustainable, and there's a lot of debate, okay? Now the question was, do you have a different material with which you can actually go taller? And there wasn't actually any material for the longest time, but now they're talking about new concrete or the green concrete, right? But yet to be tested at a very large scale. What is coming is mass timber. So people are talking about timber again.
Interesting.
And there have been few buildings already built with mass timber, including high-rise structure.
Even in India?
Not in India. So there's one building in Singapore, but I think they built 6-story campus.
Wow.
There's a building in Sydney, they have already built with mass timber, and that's only 20-story building. So I think mass timber is, I haven't formed my opinion on it yet, whether it's sustainable. This is definitely the solution to not building with concrete. Also, look at sustainability in a long term, right? When you build with mass timber, you can actually build them modular. For example, what happens to your building after 40 years? Do you demolish it or you can reuse it? And this is part of sustainability as well. Like most of the buildings, if you see in a city, even if they were built like 30 years ago, people already want to demolish them, right? Which means they're not sustainable. You actually built it 30 years ago, and now you're demolishing, right? A lot of waste, a lot of concrete has gone, right? The answer with mass timber is that you can actually almost remove the bolts and reuse it in some way. So reusing the building will itself be more sustainable. There's a lot of debate happening from design point of view now. I think we should definitely, we are beginning to look at the buildings now, is repurposing. For example, how do you design for the future? For example, let's say workspace, right? You're designing for a workforce which is going to take that building now, and you need the physical workforce in the office, right? 20 years down the line, when AI comes in, you're probably not going to have so much workforce, right?
Yeah.
What do you do with those spaces, right? So, do we have buildings which can adapt to, for example, can the office become residential? Can the office become a different hotel, for example, right?
Wow.
How do you repurpose a building for use and for long-term sustainability? I think that's something we have to start looking at here,
Wow.
which we're not doing right now. Okay,
Yeah.
I think that's something where people are actually building a lot because they want to just build quick, look at the short term, get your cash in. But in the long term, I think once you start looking at the building in the long term, 40 years plus, then your answer will come differently.
I mean, I'm fascinated by everything that you're saying, and it's giving me such a great perspective about where Indian architecture and design is right now and what seems to be a really positive future. But at the end, I'm going to ask you, one question. I'm going to divide it into two parts.
Yeah.
One, of course, I obviously see architects like you, and I see a lot of great conversations happening, and I do feel very bullish about where Indian architecture is going. At the same time, I also see that, as an example, we don't have as many landmark spaces in the world as we once did. Whenever India is spoken of in terms of landmarks, or in terms of iconic architecture, it is typically like stuff that was built many decades ago. A Taj Mahal, for example, is still something that every celebrity outside comes to India, but what is a modern thing that they're kind of looking out for? So, I want to understand, why have we not been able to meet that potential of creating iconic architecture in India? And second, what is it about where we are heading towards that makes you feel excited and bullish?
Right. I think we're still a young country, right? So a lot of focus was on giving people home.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, first priority. So everything you see in a city, or mostly you see in cities, actually providing homes. What makes it iconic? Obviously, when you start to look at other stuff like museums in a city.
Yeah.
That's iconic. Go to MoMA, it's iconic, right?
So
do we have more art galleries, the museums? Do we have more opera, for example, in the city? And obviously, there are a lot of, do we need more theaters in the city?
Yeah.
So the good thing is now it's happening. People are already talking about it, right? Because we are sort of moving away, just looking at the city and giving people home, which is obviously still happening.
Yeah.
But I think the second layer is coming, which gives me hope that that would make it, because you want to go in a city, for example, you go to Europe, right?
Yeah.
You always want to walk in a city.
Yeah.
You don't care what the glass building is, right, or iconic building. The city itself is iconic. New York city is iconic. Yes, they have some beautiful buildings and beautiful architecture, but you still want to spend time near Central Park. The park itself is iconic. And you want to go to the museums, you want to go see this museum, right? So once that happens, that will give us really iconic places, like you said, not just the building. And the conversation is good that we just don't want to build the tall towers. And like I said, you don't want to build a tall tower and nobody can see it from the ground, right? You need those space to celebrate it. This is where multiple stakeholders have to come in, especially government or the city planners. They will make space for this social infrastructure in the city, and you'll begin to see different.
The one Indian city that actually comes to mind when you talk like this is Chandigarh for me.
Yeah.
But are there other cities that you see in India that you feel is going in this direction, where you feel very excited about its potential?
Yeah, I mean, I like Mumbai city because we still have the old. We're still building new. I think when you build new, we also learn in the process. So creating, the creation itself is like, the process itself is so exciting.
Yeah.
And a lot of questions will begin to come from that process, right? there are few development which will, like I said, I think always like cutting off from the city, creating this boundary wall and so-called gated community. They also development in the same area, creating retail, right? And I think this is so exciting. In a long term, where people will say, "Hey, I like that. I want to buy in this property, not in this property. But I want to be part of the city," and that would be exciting. Yeah.
My final question on this thread is, how can design actually differentiate between this is a very cluttered category, right? How does design differentiate between different kinds of players in this market?
See, and I think there's a difference between construction and architecture.
Sure. I love that. Yeah.
Construction is you're building a building. It's very technical. You're just pouring concrete. The architecture is thinking about everything else, not only just those 4 BHK or 3 BHKs, right? The difference will come from them. The developers now who are actually thinking about all the different layers, social layers, climate, ecology, what building does in the city, and then the most important thing is lifestyle.
Correct.
Like who your buyers are. Like people who are buying home, they just don't want to buy, or they should not just buy concrete. They should buy the lifestyle. Like, can this house give you the lifestyle? And the developers we are working with, they're actually thinking about all that, and they would go on to totally differentiate them from the market.
Love that. No, this is I love how you have actually brought everything down to that simple fact of architecture versus construction.
Yeah.
And we need to think design to be able to actually create livable, breathable, walkable cities.
Yeah.
I love that. So we come to our final segment, and this is a fun, quick one.
All right.
It's called 4321 Real Advice, which is what our entire conversation has been about. I'm going to ask 4 different questions, and we're going to give some numbers to you. Hopefully, we'll get some exciting answers in return. So, 4 tips you will give to a first-time home owner.
Yeah.
About design.
I think I was a first time home buyer, right?
Yeah.
Now I'll give, if you want to live in that house, choose your lifestyle. Will this house give you the lifestyle you want to have, right? If you're a young buyer buying your first home, see how your family can grow in the home. Third thing would be is choose neighborhood. Like if you're growing a family, it's important in which neighborhood your kid will grow and what school the kid will go into, right? And the connection with your public infrastructure. Like, do you in future have accessibility to a metro? Is it walkable? Well, that's just going to change your life. So home, yes, should be about a lifestyle, but also the location and how it actually works in the city.
It's a great answer. Okay. 3 myths everyone has about the real estate sector that you want to break.
I think there are a lot of thoughts goes behind a building. Okay, it's not just like quick and someone thought like that and just build, right? And I don't know whether that's a myth or not, but there are a lot of time which is going behind the scene to just create that the building, right? Someone just curating every space, what people actually will eventually use. So there are developers now who are really thinking about cities. So it's probably a myth that they don't really care, but I think the developers, at least we are working with, they are caring, they're giving back to the city, and they genuinely want to have a good impact in the city more than just profit and loss, right? They really want to build something which they're proud of. And that is a good change happening in the city.
Yeah. That's one thing. You have to give me 2 more.
Oh my God, okay.
2 other myths.
The myth in real estate, okay. I'm generally very optimistic about real estate, so I'm not sure about what myth is there. I think one of the myths, and obviously was true, that in the sort of old times, whether I'll get my house or not, but I think it's changing now.
Yeah.
Right? People actually building it is getting built quicker than what it used to be, so people can move into their house again. The other thing listed myth was probably, and depends on which city you are, right?
Yeah.
We used to buy homes away from the city, and I don't know the road will come there or not, but now It's changing. People are aware. People are aware about infrastructure.
Correct.
They know how the planning is actually working, which roads are coming. So I think people are actually more aware about real estate now, how they used to be probably 10 years ago, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people are not buying into myths. I think that's a great thing. Right. 2 things you know about real estate design and architecture that you feel not enough people know.
I think I'll go back to the answer that how many nights we actually just designing behind the scene to create something, and suddenly people are just like living in those spaces, right? Nobody knows how much effort actually goes behind creating those spaces. Like from the sort of canvas of a site, and also how it works in the neighborhood. There are a lot of studies which happen, like why this building should be built in a city this way. We physically go to site, we see the whole neighborhood, we see everything. So not many people know that it actually happens. People just think like, for example, we're just designing the building, but no, it's just more than that.
Correct.
We're shaping those behaviors on ground floor. So yes, going back to your first question, the 12-year-old kid, if the kid can go out and cycle and go to a coffee shop and know the uncle at the shop, right? We actually probably thought about it.
That's beautiful.
Otherwise, if we don't think about it, then you can't even go out of your home and just have to get in a car and to drive to this shop, which is 10 minutes away, right?
Yeah.
So all that happens in the background, which is really exciting. I think a lot of people working to shape those spaces, passionate people. And especially now, there are a lot of passionate people working in our industry who are actually very much about all the topics which we discussed.
Yeah.
Not just like thinking buildings in a traditional way, but also like climate, ecology, how behaviors linked with the city. All that is happening in the background now. It's much more. This conversation happening much more now when I started working. For example, my first job. It's happening a lot now.
You still have to give me one more thing. You've only said one thing.
Oh, my answers are so long.
It's a long answer, but it's one
probably
thing.
Probably I'm mixing up.
You give me one more. You've given one really great one.
What was the question?
The question is, what is it that you know that not enough people do? So one thing that you said, that there's a lot of time and investment that goes in. What is the other thing about
Other thing is sometimes when the buildings are built, right? And we actually go and see those buildings. And sometimes you also wanted to do in a certain way, but in the process, where there are so many stakeholders, you chose to do it in a different way. But when people actually buying and living in those, they would never know it, right? But as a designer, you always say, "Oh my God, why did we agree to that point? If we had just done this, it would be even better, right?" So that we know, right? Nobody can know those.
So basically, we need to empathize with the architects.
Absolutely.
We need to know that there's a lot going on behind them. We don't really know. Okay. Finally, one real advice someone has given you about real estate design and architecture that you'd like to share with us.
I think the best advice I got, and from my design mentor itself, is when we were studying architecture, we were very much focused on architecture, the building itself. We were fascinated by the shapes and what it does, and probably icon, and oh my God, how do we get the iconic structure? The best advice I got was like, let's start thinking of neighborhoods, what the building does to a city, as simple as just like how the building is coming and touching the ground. And I think just changes the way you look at how the buildings are built, right? That was definitely the best advice I got. And from a residential point of view, obviously, we have always grown sort of in the architecture field, knowing from the buyer point, location. We always just talk about residential location, right? Because that sort of gives you the long-term value from your assets.
No, I've actually heard the location advice from another guest on this podcast. So, I mean, clearly there is some truths to it that are universal. But thank you so much, Ankit. I've learned so much from you about design, especially about the storytelling behind design, the behavior that homes can enable, the stories we make. I love what you said about how buildings are not just about what they are, but what they can do. You know, so much to think about when we don't actually, as you're so right? At the end you said, We don't actually understand the amount of thinking that goes behind this. And I feel like, as you also rightly said, if all the stakeholders get together to agree that we need to create buildings for the future,
Yeah.
we need to design homes not for just right now, but for 20 years, where they are repurposable, they are reusable,
Yes.
and we can create better, iconic architecture, not just for ourselves, but for our cities, for our country, and for the future. But learned so much from you. Thank you so much for expanding my mind, and so much for an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much, Ankit.
Thank you, Nikil. My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Loved speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Wasn't that amazing? I always feel I learn something new when we dive into these fabulous real estate topics. If you're hungry for more, we've got you covered. Head over to birlaestates.com/real advice. It's packed with everything you need to know about real estate. It's got a blog, a chatbot to answer your burning questions, and so much more. Keep an ear out also for our upcoming podcasts. We've got some very exciting episodes in the pipeline. Thank you for tuning in. This is Nikil Taneja signing off. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of real estate.